Good morning, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We reached today our final day for this hearing of this session. And first, I would like to remind you or to draw your attention for a couple of things. Please refer to our website for the link of our live streaming. And the other thing is for the translation, we changed the link of the Zoom application for the translation. So please, if you need any translation for today, refer to us, write us an email under ppt_berlin@riseup.net to get the new link for the translation. The link will be sent to you in the email with the instruction on how to get it. First, I would like to recap with what we went through yesterday. Yesterday was our second day of this hearing, and we had of this session, and we had 4 hearings. We had at the beginning hearing on the situation on the Greek islands. We also had a hearing on criminalization of solidarity and a hearing on racism and the criminalization of refugees and migrant people. We also had a hearing on living under stress. And our last hearing for yesterday was about the migrants and the workers' rights. Today is our final day, and my colleague Selina is going to tell you about the events of today. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being with us again, or maybe you just joined now. So I will just give you an overview of what we will go through today. We will start with a comment on the new European Union Pact on Migration and Asylum, which was recently released and is highly debated and seen as mostly an instrument that tightens the already discriminative European Union border politics. And we will have an input from Wiebke Judith from ProAsyl, a German NGO. And we will also have comments from other members of our PPT across Europe, from Flore, Murad, Yavanovitch, from Comitato, Verita e Giustizia per il Nuovi Desaparacidos, and from Federico Pacheco from La Via Campesina, and from Red Brennan from the Transnational Institute. And then we will go on with the final point of our day for the jury to give their comments and reflection to the Berlin hearing, and also we will open up the space for any questions that might have aroused. And at the end, we will give out a thank you note to all the people who are part of the Berlin hearing. So now we start with Wiebke Judith. She will join us via Zoom, and I hope you will enjoy this last day of our Berlin hearing. Thank you.
Good morning. I think, am I speaking now?
Me?
Yeah, okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm, as Selina introduced me, I'm Red Brennan from the Transnational Institute, and I will be facilitating our short discussion this morning on the Europe of the Pact, or the EU Pact. My co-panelists, Wiebke Judith from Germany, from ProAsyl, Flore from the Organization for the New Disappeared, Justice the New Disappeared, and Federico Pacheco from La Via Campesina. Our idea this morning is to have a short, to have around, it will be short anyway, we only have 1 hour, it's very short. But yeah, we will at least sketch the broad lines of how Europe and the EU Pact is today. And then we will have an exchange among the 3 panelists, and we will come back with some proposals to the panel of the PPT, and also allow time for questions from the jurors. I think it was Gianni in the opening last Friday who indicated that in a way it is Europe that's on trial in this particular series that we've had on the violations of impunity of migrants and refugee peoples within the European context. And also Luciana Castellina also put an emphasis on this, and also an emphasis on the fact that we were in Berlin, that it is a historical moment. So I think for all of us who have been part of the preparation of the Berlin Tribunal, but also who have been in the process since 2016, actually, or 2017, this is certainly a historic milestone. And we hope that we will end today's session with some strong ideas, some strong strategies about where we are going in this context of the EU Pact. I like to think that actually we are, through the process of the tribunal, we are actually looking at 3 Europes. The Europe of the Pact, the Europe that has been lived and is being lived by migrants and refugees in Europe and in their journeys to Europe. And the third, of course, is the Europe that we want to construct. The Europe, the historic challenge that we pick up, and the Europe we want to construct. So in terms of the Europe that migrants and refugees are living, we've had the most extraordinary, I think, testimonies all through yesterday. The absolute intolerable situations of maybe what we could even call low intensity torture. Not only the physical challenges of the journeys, the treatments at the border, the treatments inside the camps, the inhuman situation of, well, Lesbos being maybe a very concentrated example. But I think after the conclusions of yesterday's testimonies, we have to conclude that this is a deliberate policy to create an absolutely hostile environment within Europe to totally prevent and discourage migration and the seeking of asylum as far as the European continent is concerned. So we've had many indications of what that really is. We've had many voices from different parts of the world, from Latin America, from Asia, and from Africa, of course, who give their testimony that this is an intolerable situation. When we turn to the Pact, and that's what we will do now, we will see that the Pact actually is not maybe what some people might have hoped for, a kind of a new beginning or a U-turn, which is demanded by the circumstances. In actual fact, what we have is a very distorted sense of solidarity, for example, that governments are being, some governments within the European Union are becoming paid mercenaries, as the model has also been imposed on the external borders and on governments or groupings of states, such as in Libya, in Turkey, to actually do this bidding of exclusion of migrant and refugees. In the context of the Pact, I mean, it was on the table for to be introduced in the autumn. Well, I think it was accelerated because of the fire in Moria. But instead of taking lessons and taking that historical opportunity to learn from Moria, in actual fact, what's been rolled out is a continuation and intensification of the policies that have led to Moria. So I will now ask Wiebke to share with us her observations on the Pact, and we will proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me fine. I will share my screen. Oh, I am not allowed to share my screen. Well, otherwise I can also skip that, or I need to be given the permission. Perhaps to just continue with what was just described, because I think it was already a pretty good introduction to what is coined the new Pact on Migration and Asylum. Okay, I can share my screen. So the new Pact on Migration and Asylum was introduced by the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, on the 23rd of September this year. But actually, it is part of a longer standing reform process which started in 2016. But back then, the negotiations eventually failed because the member states could not actually agree on how to more fairly distribute the responsibility for asylum seekers in Europe. So when Ursula von der Leyen took office last year, she already announced that they would come up with some new proposals for such a reform. But then throughout the year, this was actually, deadlines were pushed and pushed because there was still actually no agreement among the member states. And as Britt already pointed out, okay, it does not, okay, now, as Britt already pointed out, one of the turning points was the fire of Moria, which was seen by the European Commission as bringing on new momentum actually for a change of the asylum system. But unfortunately, this momentum was apparently not for a positive change, making a horrible situation like we have on the Greek islands in situations that led to a catastrophe like the fire of Moria to never happen again. We have actually seen proposals which will rather cement the current situation. And I will now explain why. I will focus on the newly proposed screening and border procedures, and then just give a little bit of input on the whole question of responsibility and solidarity, where the proposals were also pretty disappointing. So the new pact proposes that every asylum seeker who enters irregularly to the EU, or actually any person who enters irregularly to the EU, will undergo a screening. Now, we also have to see that asylum seekers effectively have no way to legally enter the EU, to get a visa, to come here by regular means. So they have to usually undergo life-threatening journeys and cross our borders irregularly. So then they would be conducted, or they would have to undergo a screening for 5 to 10 days. And why this on the first glance may sound not too bad, it's security and health checks, identification. The main problem is that it is under a fiction of non-entry. So during this time, asylum seekers are deemed legally to not have actually entered the EU. So they are on the territory, for example, on the Greek islands. This is a photo of the new camp on Lesbos, Karatepe, so the new Moria. And this would be the reality which any person faces that comes to the EU in these circumstances. So it would practically mean first days of detention for everyone. Another problem is that so far the vulnerability assessment is very weak. So we're afraid that vulnerable people will actually not be detected. But this is pretty important during this phase because effectively the screening is meant to be some sort of sorting mechanism to decide what kind of track a person follows after that screening. So it is crucial that medical needs are detected, that unaccompanied minors are detected, but all of this is not possible under the circumstances that are created effectively. After this, we'll see, so after the screening, an asylum seeker can actually have can be channeled into 2 options. So there's the normal asylum procedure, but then we also have a broadened new border procedure that is proposed. And this is actually obligatory for to apply to some nationalities, and those are all nationalities with protection rates below 20%. This is a very random decision to make all of these people go into the border procedure. But for example, in the case of Italy, this will actually mean that the majority of people who arrive at Italy's shores would have to go into the border procedure. And it is also up to the member states to decide to apply the border procedures to effectively all asylum seekers that enter their borders. Now, this border procedure can last up to 12 weeks. During a so-called crisis, this can also be expanded to 20 weeks. And also during this time, the people will be considered to not have entered the EU. So again, we assume that this will effectively mean detention, because to let people walk around freely would actually quite defy this whole idea that they have not entered the EU. So throughout this procedure, which is the only asylum procedure that they are supposed to get, they will be detained in, for example, camps like this. This is why this picture is quite illustrative. And problems that come with this are quite obvious, we think. Some of the main problems are that there's not a necessary support system, especially if you have these procedures more at the periphery of Europe, so at the borders. You will not have enough lawyers, you will not have enough NGOs, and perhaps they can't even access freely such a closed camp. One aspect I also want to point out is that the member states are also free during these procedures to conduct so-called admissibility procedures. And that means that it will actually not be questioned what happened to the person in their country of origin, but it would be looked at which country did they cross on the way to Europe. So for example, on the way to Greece, which then is usually Turkey. And we know this concept of the safe third country from the EU-Turkey deal from 2016, which is also a major factor on why we have the current situation on the Greek islands as it is today. And the criteria for these safe third countries are actually weakened by the proposals that still stem from 2016. And it really creates this risk that more people will simply be pushed out of Europe, will be sent to another country, and that Europe can quite effectively pull out of the international refugee protection system when they apply this notion of a safe third country. So we are against the application of such a concept overall. But even if you apply it, you have to have very high standards. So if you lower these standards, that is really a risk for refugee protection in Europe. If it comes to a negative decision during this asylum border procedure, which I really want to stress, we think will not be a fair procedure and will not be suitable to also understand more complicated cases that can come especially from also countries with overall low recognition rates, especially, for example, cases of human trafficking or gender-specific cases like female genital mutilation. So after this asylum border procedure, you'll have immediately a new return border procedure, which can be another 12 weeks, also without entry to the EU, and which then overall means that we'll probably see more and more asylum seekers to be detained at Europe's borders till up to 6 months. So this is quite an incredible amount of time. And this could really change the situation at the borders, but not to the better, but actually to the worse. So to now, and this is actually a bit of an overview what a asylum applicant that might experience in Europe. So first of all, the screening for 5 to 10 days, then the asylum border procedure, and then the return border procedure. And this is how I come up then with the whole of 6 months of detention at the border. Now, just to finish up briefly, because I know we also have other very interesting speakers who make some important points. Like I said before, the 2016 negotiations actually failed because the member states could not agree on how to distribute asylum seekers. And especially on this front, the new proposals actually are not that new because it, in essence, actually keeps the current Dublin system, which is the system which decides which member state has to conduct the asylum procedures. It keeps this Dublin system actually in place, but it makes it even tougher. The time limits for the member states to request the transfers are made shorter, which may be a huge problem for family unification within Europe. And also the people are not supposed to get any kind of social benefits when they actually do go to another country, because as we know, the situation for asylum seekers and refugees in countries like Italy and Greece has in the past been so bad that they feel forced to continue to other EU member states. Now, this system is just kind of added on a certain solidarity mechanism for cases of disembarkation after search and rescue, like on the photo, but also if a country experiences migratory pressure. And then the other member states are supposed to pledge certain solidarity mechanisms, like the relocation of asylum seekers, but only of those who don't undergo the border procedure. And then, or to relocate recognized refugees, or to do so-called return sponsorships. This is quite a new and problematic invention of the new pact, which means that a country can pledge to enforce returns from another EU country. And then finally, some capacity building. But one of the main problems is, of course, this is quite a political system. Every year, countries have to make pledges. So every year, this also opens up the process of a political bargaining process. Every year, this subject can also be instrumentalized by far-right actors, for example, if an election campaign is going on. And for the countries of the South in Germany and Europe, there is really no guarantee for an effective solidarity with them. And there's not really an effective guarantee that in the future, they will not continue to be the ones who primarily have to deal with migration and refugees in Europe. So this is, I'll just wrap up with that, and perhaps just to mention, of course, these are just the proposals by the Commission at this point. So we will still see the Council and the European Parliament to be involved. So we will probably see some changes, but we are quite afraid that the main big points like the asylum border procedure and the return border procedure, that this will be kept in place, and that this would really be a major stroke to an asylum system in Europe, which places the protection of people in the which has this as the focus to really protect people. Thanks.
Respected members of the jury, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody, thanks for the invitation. The European authorities have used the COVID crisis to justify and to strengthen the already existing border policies that we are witnessing in the Mediterranean, which is the subject of my intervention today. Practice, I summarize them: practice of non-assistance at sea, mass detention, mass pushbacks to Libya, and first returns of survivors of torture to a place of war and rape. In the central Mediterranean, the consequences of such policies are particularly lethal and devastating. We are indeed witnessing an acceleration of the crimes against humanity, against migrants and refugees that had been already highlighted and sentenced by the Palermo judgment in December 2017 of the PPT. This combination of lethal policies, we can say they are deliberate policies to not save lives. To summarize, these policies we are witnessing are withdrawal of European states' rescue asset, blockade of all humanitarian vessels, and distress call left unanswered. This is creating a deadly rescue gap in the Mediterranean. And today we can speak of this place as a physical elimination, due to the concert efforts to prevent those in distress to arrive in Europe. It is today very well known that the shift from pushbacks to pullback delegated to the Libyan militias constitute an attempt to avoid accountability under human rights law. Not only Italy should be considered complicit of this violation, but also EU institutions and member states, which are providing technical, logistical, and political support, and even direct operational coordination through aerial surveillance into migrant interception at sea. It is a black hole. There is an institutional censorship which systematically seeks to hide evidence by removing all uncomfortable witnesses who could expose institutional responsibilities. And today, only the bodies that are stranded on the Libyan and Tunisian shores and the rare voice of the victims that are collected by the ongoing working of Alarm Fund and the monitoring networks allow us to become aware of the extent of the structural, systematic, and repeated crimes that we are dealing with today. There is an issue that would require further investigation, but there is clear evidence that the cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment is today a means of controlling migration flows. And to put it plainly, we can say that torture is a deterrence tool, and we would like the jury to further investigate and to consider this to make a determination. The document I'm exposing today developed with the lawyer Fulvio Vassallo, who coordinated the indictment of Palermo's sentence, will be shared with the jury. It provides detailed case of non-assistance at sea, but I will sketch the main lines today for the audience. Italy's conduct and EU conduct in the central Mediterranean is leading to mass torture, rape and forced labor and unspeakable abuses for thousands of refugees and migrants. There is a number that is very rarely quoted, but it is an estimation of IOM. We're talking of 55,000 people forced return to the camps in Libya in only 3 years from the beginning of the cooperation with the Libyan militias. It is useless to say the devastating effects on health that these forced returns of victims of torture back to the camps where they're enduring same horrors. We also witness various distress cases of boats left at sea, drifting for many days, with case of agony on board by dehydration, burns, and hunger in breach of all international laws and conventions. It is not rare for our rescue teams on board of humanitarian ships to find dead bodies on board who have been dying during the travels and also during the forced returns to Libya. And I will really remember an important emblematic case, the Easter case, where a group of children, women and men who had left Libyan coast on 15th of April entered the Maltese Sahara region, were forcibly returned to Libya by a private vessel. During their 6 days at sea that was controlled by Aryan European assets, 5 people have died and 7 others went missing and are presumably dead. The Maltese authorities have coordinated this privatized pullback. And the distress case had been known by the European authorities for 6 days, and there are proofs of aerial surveillance of this case. But there are many other cases of non-assistance at sea with deaths as a consequence. The long standoffs also that are increasing in the Mediterranean because of denying permission to disembark the vulnerable people in safe ports is also a health issue. We're talking of vulnerable human beings who have been left Libyan camps, escaping Libyan camps. We're talking of unaccompanied minors, pregnant women, and individuals in need of medical attention. And these people are left stranded at sea for many days. This closed port policy could expose vulnerable people to ill treatment and could amount to evidence of systematic, cruel, and inhuman degrading treatments. I skip all the other cases we have from all the vessels who have been refused to disembark in the last years in Italy. All their names have been quoted in this tribunal: Sea-Watch, Sea Ice, Mediterranean, Open Arms, SOS Mediterranean. All these vessels have been had cases of health issues on board, of disparate acts of self-harms by migrants, people jumping on boards of desperation. You all have seen also the image of the denourished survivors from Libya on board of a livestock cargo Thalia who have been stranded offshore for 5 days. And finally, I would like to remember the case of Abu Diakate, a teenage boy who was held offshore with others as part of the anti-COVID measures, despite being very ill, and who died in Palermo 2 weeks ago after 2 weeks of quarantine on a ship chartered by Italian authorities. And I think Abu is is emblematic of a civilization who doesn't want to recognize signs of torture in survivors coming from Libya. And the conclusion is that we are witnessing increasing sufferings and loss of lives within the SAR European zone and within the European border. And I think that as a civil society association, today we are requesting, we are convinced that the TPP is the only tribunal capable of highlighting the structurality of this impunity, of highlighting the structurality also of this ongoing genocide at EU borders, as the TPP stated itself in a declaration in last March 2020. I will share the documents with the jury.
Thank you, Flore. Thank you. That Flore has flagged up for us what many of us see and read in headlines, or if we are privileged enough to be in Berlin, we get, as in many of yesterday's testimonies, the conditions in Lesbos from people who have been there, even people who've been there, like the doctor who just came back after the fire of Maria. So what we are seeing on the ground and what we indicate is that the EU Pact is actually a continuation, even a cynical continuation of existing policy. On the one hand, Wiebke has indicated that there is actually no legal way for asylum seekers to come to Europe, but also there is extremely limited way for migrants to come to Europe. And I think Federico will touch on that now. And we also had several instances of what that means for migrants who, well, the COVID pandemic has made it very, very clear that the global restructuring of labor and its implications for Europe means that Europe actually cannot continue in many vital areas like agriculture, construction, care, domestic work without migrant labor. So I will ask Federico now to make his contribution. Thank you.
Hola, buenos días. Yo antes que nada quería agradecer todo este esfuerzo y compromiso de todos los organizadores y participantes en esta sesión, en esta nueva audiencia de la 45ª sesión del TPP, porque yo creo que estamos demostrando constancia y valentía en seguir denunciando todo y visibilizando esta violación permanente y sistémica de nuestros derechos como migrantes por parte de la Unión Europea y de los Estados europeos. Y ahora estamos hablando del pacto europeo que se nos presenta, y yo creo que hay que ver que esta sesión nos sirve para ver bien este contexto en el cual se presenta y poder interpretar no solo su contenido, sino la manera como se quiere plantear ante la población europea en algo que yo considero que es una estrategia de propaganda de guerra. Hay una guerra declarada contra los pueblos migrantes, y este tipo de medidas y estos envoltorios que se le dan tanto al Pacto Europeo como fue el Global Compact hace unos años, son una manera de seguir con unas medidas, con unos contenidos represivos y restrictivos, pero bajo un envoltorio humanitario, hipócrita y manipulador, para que la población llegue a aceptar y normalizar una situación que es indigna e inaceptable. Los testimonios que hemos ido escuchando durante esta audiencia, que muestran un sufrimiento del pueblo migrante en las fronteras, en los campamentos como en Lesbos, en Moria, pero también en el interior de Europa, como en Alemania, España y otros sitios, en la vida diaria, en la explotación en el trabajo. Yo creo que nos deja claro que hay una base ideológica en donde no se reconoce a la persona migrante como sujeto de derechos, no se le reconoce su cualidad de persona, ya que es catalogada como delincuente, como peligro social, como criminal,
to whom the rule of law
que esta persona decide, por una parte, resistir en sus lugares de origen y no aceptar imposiciones políticas, económicas, que destruyen sus economías locales y que imponen dictaduras, cuando decide no respetar unos muros fronterizos que dejan pasar las mercancías, pero no a las personas que necesitan moverse, y cuando, una vez llegado en Europa,
commodities can travel freely, they can't. And when those migrants actually start to demand being treated equally with other people, but they are treated as a social danger or criminal. This is based on an ideology of racism and colonialism, which means that society normalizes and accepts an indecent situation. We've talked about discrimination, police harassment, and even imprisonment and even killings of migrants. This is a declared war against migrants in which economic profits are attempted for the multinationals or gained by multinationals, but governments introduce systems of control and manipulation to take away rights, not just of migrants, but the rights of the whole population. The migrants in these agreements and pacts is presented to us as either a criminal or a victim, but never as a subject of right. This is a negative and dangerous phenomenon, which we have to fight against. I think that the European Union has missed a great opportunity, as Brid said before, at this moment of the pandemic, with this economic crisis also, as well as the health crisis. We have seen how migrant people, both those who are documented and undocumented, are essential for our economy and our lives. And trying to recognize these rights, and instead of recognizing these rights and legalizing people and accepting the migratory phenomenon as part of our lives, what we're seeing is how they're continuing to apply this hypocritical discourse, which wraps itself in humanitarian language, which is basically the same agreement between states. It is closing borders, it is necropolitics, it is increasing exploitation and the vulnerability of migrant workers in Europe. And we are seeing how it is being made more easy to deport people by outsourcing immigration control to other third countries. There have been some advances, which is because the authorities don't control things completely. For example, rescuing migrants at sea is taking place, whether they like it or not, and they're having to also distribute refugees and migrants among the European countries. These are small advances that we've achieved, but they're minimal ones. And life is still hard for migrant people. I think this session of the Tribunal has been very important. In the social movements, we need to take advantage of this opportunity and the situation that the current context gives us, and we need to organize in Europe to advance and gain our rights. We need to continue strengthening our resistance by sharing the different resolutions from this tribunal. We need to get out onto the street and involve people in our resistance. And we need to be clear, and we're very clear about this in Villa Campesina, We support the resistance of our farmers and young people in the countries of origin to not be forced to emigrate. We want to have food sovereignty and strong local economies and independent economies. But if people do take the choice to migrate and take on the borders because they're fighting for their life and the life of their communities, and they're also denouncing every day in Central America and Bangladesh and in the Mediterranean by putting their own body and their soul and their suffering and their life in this conflict with the border system. This is something we should support. We should support them in that decision. So along that route, we should use the international instruments that recognize our rights. Among them, we should contribute the UN Declaration on Farmers or Peasants' Rights. This declaration covers all rural workers who are migrants. This Pact and the PPT network and other organizations which are allied with us, we said in Morocco the need to have a pact based on solidarity and recognition of rights. This was the UN Declaration of the Rights of Peasants, the UN draft. This guarantees the right to movement of all people, and through applying that, we can then help end racism and discrimination. We cannot. It's clear that we cannot expect anything from the state. What will happen in the future and how humanity develops will depend on our work in the grassroots and the alliances that we sow. So another Europe, another world is possible, and solidarity and life will win. That is what we think. So encouragement to everybody, and let's meet again in the struggle.
Muchas gracias, Federico. Creo que I'd just like to add, can you hear me? Yeah? Yes, you can hear me. Okay. I just would like to add, sorry, I would just like to add, sorry, sorry, just a moment, please. Yeah, I would like to add, maybe in relation to what has been said also yesterday and now this morning, that in actual fact, what we see in relation to Europe's policies, this combination of a racist neocolonialism, which is about the extraction of resources and the so-called needs for a modern Europe, and that the activities of transnational corporations are a key factor in this. And not only that, they are a key factor also in the business of the borders, in the militarization and securitization. The military-industrial complex in Europe has gotten a new lease of life. And at TNI, we've done some studies and analysis on this. And I share here this, one of the publications called Expanding the Fortress. And I think it's really important for us that, well, Federico dealt with it actually, that there are many ways in a way of making war. And there's real war that's happening in our neighboring countries where Europe has really participated, but also war on the spirit and the bodies of people, including the denial of their humanity, which has resulted in some of the testimonies which we got yesterday of enforced torture actually within the European context. So now we are coming very close to our last part of our contribution. And I will go back to each of the panelists to ask perhaps for a final reflection, and also in particular, if they have specific proposals to the Permanent People's Tribunal. So we will start again with Wiebke.
Thank you very much. I think the Tribunal, but also just looking at what happened in the last years in Europe, especially at the borders, really shows how the current system is designed in a way to lead to human rights abuses. Where you look at the Mediterranean, we see people die, but we don't have a European search and rescue program, but actually the NGOs who do it are hindered in always new creative ways. We look at the situation on the Greek islands, and we have seen this for basically 5 years, and we don't see an improvement, but we actually see a worsening of the situation. And now we have proposals which continue to exactly focus on these aspects. So border procedures, pushing people away from Europe. So what we really would need is like almost a U-turn in European refugee politics to really, put the protection of people at the core of the policies, to also proactively open safe and legal ways for people to come here, to avoid that people actually have to undergo life-threatening journeys in the first place. But then once they're here, to give them, of course, fair procedures, to house them from the beginning on in livable and human rights compliant ways. But for this, we really need a new political commitment from all EU member states, of course, but till we don't have that, I do think we need the political commitment, first of all, of course, from Brussels, which we don't see at the moment, and then from those member states who are still willing to accept refugees, to be stronger on this regard, and to really make clear that if the EU wants to keep what is called the European values at all, we first of all always have to start with those who are at the margins of society, and refugees and migrants are very much pushed to the margins of our society at the moment. So the way we treat them also really shows what Europe is about at the moment, and this is not at all a good picture and is not inspired to think highly of European values at the moment. So thank you very much also just for conducting of this tribunal, and I very much look forward to the conclusion of the judges, and I'm sure they have seen a lot in the last days on what they can base their judgment on.
Thank you, Wiebke. Flore, can we have your final remarks also?
Yes, I think we all need to stay aware that if these crimes against humanity are left unpunished, they will lead to the complete annihilation of psychological and physical lives of migrants and refugees on the move. And I think we really need to make an effort to fight this unacceptable impunity due to the fact that there is a proven links between policies, I mean, precise, deliberate policies and mass deaths on our borders. It would be urgent, I think, to establish an independent monitoring system of this European border control directly on the ground and with the refugees and the persons on the move themselves, because they are the only one now really being able to tell the entity of the crimes, of the deliberate crimes and the systematic crimes they are the victims of. This would be putting us in the possibility to name these crimes. So an independent monitoring system. And another proposal we have for the TPP is to open a permanent session that is participatory without deadlines and final dates, so that the problem can be left open and must stay visible to the broad European opinion, which is in majority now accepting these crimes and closing their eyes in front of them. So we need to have this common process that stays visible and public. This is our proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Flore. And Federico, let's have your concluding remarks also. Thank you.
Sí, yo creo que como decía, las sesiones, las distintas audiencias de esta sesión del TPP, que comparto la idea que tendría que ser permanente por la gravedad de esta situación, es para nosotros, es un instrumento muy valioso para que los movimientos sociales y las organizaciones,
social movements and civil society organizations to use it in our daily struggles, in our discourse out in the streets, because that is where we will really achieve a true social and political change. However, I think for us, it is very important, because in midst of this ideological and political battle we are in, we need to have legal arguments that are there, that exist. We need them to, we need to reach out to universities, people, common citizens, because very often they fall into the trap because of fear and manipulation. We have to reach out to the population. We have to make them see that we have a shared social and political interest to defend rights. In this regard, there are two elements which I think are essential. One is we have to highlight the primacy of human rights. It is not acceptable for part of the population where human rights and their fundamental rights are left in a second stage, and they put economic, political, geopolitical interests first, both for states and corporations. I think it's something we must insist on. And the second point is the global responsibility we have in this globalized world. We all have a responsibility. There's a global responsibility of the states, and especially those with a greater economic and political power in the world. They have a global responsibility on the rights of people and societies. So I think these are all legal arguments. We need to uphold them. We need to continue denouncing violations of these rights. We need to reach out, and we have to strengthen our struggles as social movements. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. Thank you to our panelists. I think, and we hope that actually what we've shared here this morning is very complementary to what was shared actually yesterday from inside, if you like, from inside the Europe of the camps, from inside the Europe of the fortress. I think there were so many particular witnesses yesterday, but one that stays with me, and where I think actually we have to look at what is low intensity torture within the European framework. And that is the story, the experience, the life experience of the young man who said he left West Africa because of, if you like, the extractivism of Europe in West Africa, but also it's not just even the extractivism from the land and the mineral resources, it's the extractivism from the sea, the fisheries. Many are forcibly displaced and make these perilous journeys, but they make the journey actually with the future. And this witness yesterday strongly condemned a system that takes away his future and forces him over 6 years to be in a camp where he cannot work as a young man. I mean, we have to look very seriously at the myriad examples of this and also anticipate what this means with the pact that's now coming in place. And it's a pact that tries, as some of our speakers have said, to normalize criminalization in the first place of migrants and refugees. They are looked at. This is the Europe that the leaders of Europe currently see. This is these peoples who are on the move, are forcibly displaced, are actually criminals or potential criminals. And actually this criminalization is not only reserved for migrants and refugees, but it's also reserved for those who are engaged in solidarity and who actually want to reject this Europe of the Pact. And I would like to end with saying that I think those of us, and also with the colleagues in Germany who've embarked on this particular hearing, The hearing, and I think the Permanent People's jurors and others who are here from the PPT will emphasize strongly it's a process, and the process of the movements who've been engaged, the networks who've been engaged, especially the affected communities, the self-organizations of migrants and refugees, are engaged actually in developing as their answer to this pact of distorted solidarity, if you like, the people's solidarity, an agreement for people's solidarity as the answer in going forward, and a solidarity that is actually being experienced, but it's still marginal. We need to make it to be the main response in the context of Europe, the Europe of the peoples, and we need to to put those governments who are responsible, they are responsible for this criminalization and for a vision of Europe as a place of death for many thousands of people. So we will turn now to the PPT and ask them for some questions that they may have in relation to the presentations this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Britt and to Wiebke and to Federico and also to Flore for sharing their comments on the new EU Migration Pact. And their comments also highlight why we are here today, to demand equal health for all and also to demand that this kind of regime which is going on stops. So now I would like to ask our jurors to be prepared, because I would like them to give them 2 to 3 minutes time to give a short comment on the informations, testimonies, reports we heard the last few days during the Berlin hearing and share their thoughts with us. And first will be Teresa Crafo, then Lea Bassel, then Marina Forti, then Domenico Gallo, then Kira Kosnick, and Sarah Lincoln, who is with us today here in Berlin, and Ahmed Said, and Philippe Texier, and last, our president of the panel of the jury, Luciana Castellina. And if you need translation again, because some of the contributions will be not in English, please write us an email, ppt_berlin@riseup.net, and ask for access to translation. Thank you. And I would like to remind the jurors that because of the short time we have, that we might have to interrupt or give a short sign if they go over the time. We are looking forward to your comments.
Perdón por interrumpir. I will speak in Spanish.
Sorry for the interruption. I will be speaking in Spanish. I am Simona, and before giving the floor to the members of the jury, I'd like to give you a brief introduction with regards to the comments of the jury on behalf of the General Secretariat of the Permanent People's Tribunal. The first thing I'd like to do is to thank all of the organizers of this Berlin hearing, the experts, rapporteurs, and the different witnesses we've been hearing these days for the enormous efforts put into organizing this very difficult hearing because of this hybrid session we have held. And I'd like to thank them especially for their trust that they've, for trusting in the Permanent People's Tribunal and for leading this process, which was kicked off in Palermo in 2017. My presentation will be really brief because we don't have much time. What I'd like to say is, through this Permanent People's Tribunal, we want to reach out to the public so that you know that the jury will make some spoken comments, and during the next month, the members of the jury will be drafting the link, which will be presented in December. During this time, the main goal is to consider all of the evidence that was submitted during these last 3 days and to check the information with data and available documentation. At the same time, this is a very important space that we'll be opening up to give institutions and European institutions and authorities and German authorities the opportunity to send any information they consider necessary to the Permanent People's Tribunal so that they can exercise their right to defend themselves. I'd like to recall that before the hearing, the PPT notified of the indictment was presented the first day. It was notified to the authorities precisely to give them space and time, as the tribunal statute requires, to give them the right to defend themselves. So that's all on my side. I'd now like to give the floor to the members of, to the jurors for their comments. I think we already announced the order of the intervention. Marina Forti, Domenico Siracol Lincoln, Ahmed Said, Giustizia, and Luciana. Thank you very much for your time. So Teresa Cravo, Liz Russell, Marina Forti, Domenico Gallo, Kira, Sarah Ahmed, Philip Texier, and Luciana Castellina. They each have 3 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Pardon, I believe
Teresa Almeida Cravo.
I wasn't going to be the first one, Simona, remember? I'm not, I wasn't going to be the first according to what we discussed. Okay, so my name is Teresa Almeida Cravo. It is extremely hard to do justice to all that we've heard here in the past 3 days. I have to start, obviously, and I'm sure this is shared by the rest of the members of the jury and everyone that has been present, that I am truly humbled by your testimonies and your moving accounts of your own trajectories as migrants, as well as that of others. I wanted to focus on something that I find particularly troubling in the way we discuss the topic of migrants and their rights, and that has surfaced time and again, and that is the detailed account of the microaggressions suffered by migrants in the hands of those responsible for their journeys. Indeed, I would completely agree with Brid Brennan when she calls this low intensity torture. From what we've heard, not only here in Berlin, but also in the other hearings devoted to this topic organized by the PPT, it is clear that evil has an ubiquitous presence in Europe, in European and third case countries, migrant and refugee camps, which can only be explained by the complete dehumanization of migrants and refugees. This complete denial of their humanity and dignity can only translate into a complete disregard for their rights. And it seems only appropriate with this hearing being in Berlin to invoke Hannah Arendt's concept of banality of evil. We're talking about people who go home to be loving parents with their families and yet behave in the most appalling manner, be it in the patrol vessels, in the border procedures, in the camps themselves, or in medical offices, in their appointments with migrants. And so there is clearly a situation where the way Europe has been closed onto itself and European fortresses that relates to migrants as a problem that has led this, that has basically opened the space to this sort of microaggressions from people who would otherwise behave differently. And so I believe that this intersection between the macro level of the systemic European policies of treating migrants as a problem, as a threat, as criminals, as was mentioned here, trickles down in the most troubling and shocking way to how individual people behave in the camps, in the patrol vessels, at the borders, and that needs to be dealt with. From that perspective, the struggle to get the public opinion on the side of those that feel that migrants have a place in Europe and should be cherished, welcomed, protected, is the fight to have, because without having the public opinion on our side and without raising awareness in terms of the individual behavior of the people that deal directly with migrants on a daily basis, we will continue to witness these aggressions and this low intensity torture, which is completely at odds with European values and the way we would want our society to look like, and we would want people to relate with each other. So I think we, as the PPT is working on this topic, and with this appeal to have more sessions on this, to keep the public opinion open and to these accounts, and to keep the public opinion in sync with the problems of migrants that are not peripheral to us, our society. I think it's very important to for the PPT to have this fight brought into the public opinion in a more forceful manner, and I think we should have a stake in that as well. Thank you. Thank you all for all your comments and your testimonies. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And it is really very difficult to speak after these days, and I'm still digesting the interventions of the last panelists. Thank you very much for that. And they should wash their mouths out for using the word solidarity. In terms of the hearing, as Teresa has just said, it's a privilege and a responsibility to be sitting here as a juror in this space of memory and voice and dignity. So thank you for that. What I wanted just to say very briefly a few things about was how I was thinking about what happens now, what happens in terms of publicizing, drawing attention to this vital documentation of violations, of impunities, how this can be a tool for education. And I think about that in the narrow sense of what I do in a university classroom. I was very happy in the session we just heard with the focus on colonialism and neo-colonialism, and that can be something that it's actually very hard to get across to students because they have not been taught where and how these processes in their current forms have been shaped, but also in the wider social spaces. And also, really importantly, the way this is a space of analysis of resistance, especially self-organizing by communities, analyzing how, where, what works, which actors, which strategies have worked, so we can take them back to our places, but also do some of that building of organizing and solidarity across borders. We've heard from so many collectives and movements who know best how to organize themselves, and that's in quite different ways, in different situations, from different identities and social locations. So the horizon for me that opens now is to continue to bring these struggles together. So as one person said yesterday, it's not just that we're used to having the PPT, but then things are not solved. We have this now as a living archive. How do we turn this then into more and greater solidarity of these struggles across borders, defining those lines of migrant justice, how and what it means when we call for regularization or the end of murderous border control. So what does that look like then when it's justice for all migrants, whether that is migrants with disabilities, migrant women whose domestic work is still not recognized as work, LGBTIQ+ migrants who have to justify their existence and their mental health challenges. Brid was talking about young men waiting in camps, brutalized by police, without how have their futures taken away. And finally, for me, this lends also to how these struggles can be allied with the wider struggles that they're also connected to and part of, that are the fruit of the same kind of colonial logic, where Black, Indigenous, and people of color are brutalized and murdered by police who are not migrants and refugees, whether that's in Germany, whether that's in the United States, whether it's where I'm from, so-called Canada. particularly with respect to Indigenous people. Where does that push us in terms of the horizons of justice more broadly, about anybody being detained, about the whole carceral system? And if we want health for refugees and migrants, as we heard also from people at the tribunal, needing that for the general population as well, vice versa, reciprocally. And this is happening in healthcare systems that have been ravaged by austerity, where people have been turned against each other, communities have been turned against each other. How then for migrants and refugees and all communities to enjoy the right to health? And this is the horizon for me that opens here. Thank you very much.
If it's up to me, well, as my colleague have already said, it has been an honor to be here in these 3 days. I thank you. I thanks very much all those who have had the courage to come here, to come forward, to testimony, to offer their experiences in such difficult experiences, like being in a refugee camp in Lesbos in Greece, or being in a camp in Germany, or being on the front line of helping refugees and migrants everywhere, from Germany to Italy to United Kingdom, Spain, or elsewhere. Over the past 2 days, we have heard testimonies of how the migrant people are being denied their fundamental rights, their fundamental rights, starting from the right to health, to life, to an equal part in citizenship in Europe, starting from the right to being human being, to be recognized as human being. And this is perhaps the most shocking and the most damaging things that we have heard. We have heard how in Germany, but it happens in other European countries as well, thousands of people do not have the right to access the basic health because they lack legal status, because they do not have a residence status, etc. We have heard also shocking testimonies of how widespread the racism targeting many migrants in Germany, but again, that would happen elsewhere in Europe. And it has been said, what is shocking is not only the institutionalized racism, but also this micro, this low intensity, this all this trickling down of instances of racism, of everyday racism that people is experiencing. We have heard how people with special need are systematically overlooked, ignored simply, how in overcrowded shelters, being in a Greek island or in a camp in Germany or elsewhere, life can become a hell, and can become a hell because the conditions are squalid, and also because the need of every person are systematically ignored, lost in translation, or simply just not taken into any account. The testimonies from the Greek island of Lesbos have been dramatic. We have heard, and it is precisely in Lesbos that we heard that our goal must be to grant equal rights and dignity and humanity to everyone, being migrant and of course the Greek inhabitant of Lesbos. And so we must take into account that in the past few years, since in particular, austerity and economic policies have denied public expenditure, have cut public expenditure and denied services and health and care, etc., to everyone. And this is the basis, perhaps, of this, on which was based this banalization of evil that my colleague referred to, this the normalizing the denial of right to everyone. And this is what we must absolutely fight in. And this is what I think the PPT will try to do in the next session. And I thank everyone who has come forward to offer their testimony, and I'm really honored to be here with you, although virtually today.
Hello to everybody. The testimonies that we have heard yes. Do you hear me? Okay. The testimonies that we have heard confirm that in Europe there is a question of discrimination against the migrant people similar to the discrimination against the Jewish people in the third years of the last century. Europe must become aware of this tragedy. Being aware of the problem is the first step to solving it. The Berlin session gives us many elements to work in this direction. I thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have to say, I'm so moved by what I've heard over these past days, even though a lot of the facts that were mentioned were already known to me. What struck me most, I think, is the tremendous contradiction and really absurdity of a formal commitment and a lip service to human rights and to ideas of equality. And actually, as we've heard, Europeans like to claim that, in fact, they invented the very idea of human equality and liberty and human rights, and the factual treatment of refugees and migrants. And I find it difficult sometimes to get my head around how these things can exist at the same time. And I think we've heard also, we've been given some indications of how, in fact, these two things, these tremendous contradictions and this tension is allowed to be perpetuated. And I think that what we see from the state side is tremendous work going into the perpetuation of the lip service on the one hand, and closing borders and the maltreatment of people on the other. And what allows for this to be continued, I think, is rendering people invisible by not talking about what is really happening, by looking away, by trying to suppress evidence, and of course, by also discursively framing refugees and migrants as enemies, as criminals, as people who do not matter. And therefore, I think the work that this tribunal is doing and that many of us are doing on a daily basis in our work contexts or as volunteers, that migrants themselves are doing, who have this tremendous courage to speak out about their situation. All of this, I think, is tremendously important in order to show up this contradiction and in order to intervene and make visible and fight for the extension of human rights really to all people, and to hold up the idea of human equality and dignity for all. So thank you so very much for all that have contributed to this tribunal. Thank you.
So first of all, I would like to thank all those who've made this hearing possible, the organizers, the moderators, the technicians, the translators, and especially, of course, all of the witnesses for their inspiring and empowered testimonies. So the hearing has shed further light on a completely inhumane migration regime in Germany and at the EU borders, a system which degrades migrants and refugees to second-class people by denying them basic rights. Basic rights such as the right to privacy, the right to adequate health care, and access to justice. What I found especially evident in this hearing is Germany's role as complete hardliner in many of the areas discussed here. So instead of offering refugees the protection they are entitled to under international law, Germany forces them to live far off in refugee shelters without adequate health care and under conditions that would make anyone ill. Germany regularly deports refugees with severe mental or other illnesses, although this puts their life at danger. Unaccompanied minors are treated as adults, and many of them are denied family reunion. There's hardly a country in which it is more difficult for unaccompanied minors to apply for family reunion as in Germany. And another thing you won't find in other European countries, undocumented migrants have near to no access to healthcare in Germany. If they apply for treatment, they risk immediate deportation. And at the EU level, it is Germany who is orchestrating and supporting an EU border regime based on illegal pushbacks, on inhumane encampment, and on militarization of the African borders. In many countries, Germany's migration policy is seen as moderate and humane. In this hearing, this facade has been torn down. The testimonies have painted a picture of an EU and a German government who seem to have completely lost their moral compass. But at the same time, I still leave this hearing inspired by all the witnesses who were willing to come here, who had the courage to stand up and raise their voice, to join forces and to keep on resisting. So thanks very much for this hearing. Thank you, everyone.
Oui, oui, c'est bon. Je voudrais d'abord remercier, bien sûr, les organisateurs, et plus particulièrement à Berlin, qui ont permis que se tienne une audience complète, où chacun
have made this possible and holding this whole event and allowing people to talk in the language of their own. We have talked about the terrible situation, the lack of access that migrants have to health rights. We have denounced police violence and the precariousness of migrants' lives. Throughout these sessions, in Barcelona, in Palermo, in Paris, London. We have shown, once again, and we've shown in those other events, but we've seen it confirmed here, that migrants are victims of systematic, serious violations of rights, including the right to life, and decency, and decent living conditions, and health, and a future for their families. We have seen how the authorities, both the EU authorities and those of the member states, and here we are particularly talking about Germany, but we could talk about France or Italy as well, they're acting with complete impunity. Doing international pacts and international pacts, and they're also ignoring some international agreements. We are seeing a neo-colonial policy which actually collides with migrants' rights. In terms of the way migrants are treated, the right to migrate is included in many conventions, including the UN Declaration of Rights. It's seen there is the duty to give people refuge, but states oppose this right in the name, alleging that they have national sovereignty to do so. They put them in camps or they block them at borders. We have seen the example of Moria, where they are living under inhuman conditions. Everything is designed by the core European states. And they are stopping people accessing the European soil. There is argument about how many migrants each state should bring in, and they're not even respecting the agreements about redistributing migrant numbers in different states. They're not even respecting the minimums. The hearings that we have done and have been confirmed in this Berlin session is that the practices and policies of the European Union and the member states constitute a denial of fundamental rights for people and are accompanied often by crimes of lesser humanity. So each of the member states should change their economic policy and political policies to respect the norms regarding human rights and the right to migrate. These are agreements that all of the member states have signed. They are attacking the NGOs that are helping migrants and other people that are helping people that have capsized in boats. We are in a hard stage of our long struggle, but this struggle must continue. Thank you very much, everyone, and we are going to continue in the future with our struggle. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. On the personal level, I'm so thankful to have the ability and this chance to share in such an important action from my point of view toward the alternative justice for everybody and for everywhere. And one of the most appreciated things in this drive for is giving the platform for the refugees themselves to tell their stories with their own words and from their own perspective. And I think during the last 2 days, and from what we heard, it became so clear that the human violation that the refugees are facing in Europe are not just an exception of the reality, but it's very systematic and very embedded in the system. This human rights violation actually begin even in the homelands of the refugees where they had to flee. And we can see this through how the European countries are supporting the dictatorships and supporting keeping this reality where the refugees had to flee. Yeah, and thank you very much for having me here and for giving me the chance to listen to all these scared people. Thank you.
Will you give me back my face?
Thank you very much for your valuable inputs. I would like to ask if there, to open the space. Okay, there is another input. Can we take it?
Okay.
We're still unable to hear you. Could you please unmute yourself?
Accendi Luciana, accendi il microfono.
Grazie, ecco. È il mio turno o no?
We're coming back.
È il mio turno. Posso parlare?
Sì.
Scusate, I'm sorry, but I was cancelled, and I thank very much the organizer of the tribunal in Berlin, because although they had to help me many times because I don't know, I got lost many times. Well, we have been hearing really very moving stories and dramatical story. I think especially I was shocked by what have been said about Greece, not only because the refugees' condition is there so terrible, but because terrible is also the situation of the Greeks themselves, which proves how much the European Union has to change in his policy in relation of its own member states and in relation of all the human beings which are outside our borders. It really needs a deep change, and we must push for that. What has been very clear in all what has been said is the role of the police. The problem of the police becomes really terrifying. We have seen it in the United States, and we are seeing it in Europe, and we are seeing it all over the world. This is a dangerous thing. It's not something only against the migrants, it's something against our democracy. And this is such an important issue that we have, I think, to raise it with as much strength as possible. Only one remark. Because of this role of Germany, which is so important, I would have loved to know more about the situation of the migrants. We heard about the police behavior, and this is very serious, of course, but more about the way the rules have been violated and what can we do I mean, I say this, I stress Germany, not only because we are in Berlin now, but because of the role of Germany in the weight of Germany in deciding the European policy. We are a tribunal, and we have to look very carefully to all what has been violated of our own law, rules, constitutional principle, and so on. To denounce this will help us to fight against what has been called the local racism. I mean, racism which is coming out from the people, not from the institution, which is also a very serious tendency of our societies. The role of the police, this racism, which is coming out as a as a reaction to the poorness of the people, so that they fight with each other. These are two really dangerous trends, really threatening our democracy. So let's go on. Our tribunal has a lot of work to do, and I'm very happy of this step, this session which we made here in Germany, and let's go on as much as we can. We have a lot of work to do. Thanks to the German friends for what they have done.
Thank you very much for your input. Now I would like to open the space if there is any questions to the jurors from our online participants or the participants here with us today. I'm waiting to check if there is any questions coming from our online participants. We have a question from here, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Andreas, working with Medico International, which is, I'm very happy that Medico could also contribute to this event. One thought that came into my mind, I don't want to repeat what we have heard from the jury, but one idea, and I think this is also in the core of the People's Permanent Tribunal, and I would like to also reflect on it or ask a bit, because I'm not so close to the tribunal process, is how much this dynamic of the People's Permanent Tribunal can really used in like keeping this momentum also of struggle against the migration policy alive. So in what ways, and this is what I understand that the Permanent Tribunal also tries to establish, but could you reflect on how much this effort that has been done here also in Germany and also with the international partners to work so extensively on this Berlin Tribunal you would see as something contributing to this kind of organizational dynamic also of this joint struggle. I think this would be encouraging to see, as much as it is difficult to change the policy of the European Union from such a tribunal. I think being contributing to a mobilization effort would be very encouraging for all of us who are in this struggle. That's what I would like to ask also the panel, the jury, how they see this work. Thanks.
I don't know whether I am allowed, even if I'm not a member of the jury, to answer from the point of view of the Secretary of the Tribunal. I think that the name of the Tribunal says a bit the answer what you are requesting. The Tribunal is a Tribunal of peoples. Tribunal is a platform for having people connecting their struggles in different problems and connecting them through space and time. So that, as has been said, we are part of a process as a tribunal, and the strength of the tribunal is the strength of the movement which recognize themselves in the principles of the tribunal, which is the fact of linking the political, cultural, social aspect with the juridical component, because the tribunal has been imagined by Delio Bassetti's founders years back as an instrument which is really adding up to the struggle of people. And in that sense, the fact of having different sessions in different countries in Europe, just to give the idea over the years that we are fighting the same struggles over so many years and with the changing of the situation. And in that sense, I think that what Luciana was saying about the critical role which has this section, which is a concluding step of one part of a process to give visibility and awareness to Europe and in Germany, in a situation where Germany should have or could have a supplementary role in Europe, is what the tribunal is going on. Then by itself, the tribunal certainly is creating some doctrinal support to struggles, is presenting the results in different positions to the government, to the European Union, but the tribunal has not a power of imposing or diffusing, just the opposite. The tribunal could be seen as a disturbing factor because what is considered to be normal governance is in fact declared a criminal action. And that is not something which is so interesting for the mainstream communication or journal. We are doing what we do, and we do hope to go on, as Luciana was saying before, with also our last partners, the German groups, because that would be very important. The permanent problem of the migrants is really a permanent problem for democracy.
Thank you, Gianni. We have one more comment, and then we would conclude with the Berlin hearing.
Hi, I'm Carlotta Conrad. I've been listening online for the last 3 weeks, and I just want to thank the jurors also to take your time, that you've been with us all this time during this difficult situation and blending online and local testimonies and inputs. Yeah, and I think it's, as it's been said before, but it's very important that we had this tribunal in spite of Corona and in spite of everything now, because I think there's so much content we need to work with now. We need to publicate. We can use it for education, take it out to different groups again. And so I want to thank you, especially from IPPNW, that all of you made it and took the time despite the pandemic. And I'm looking forward to the judgment, and I think it will be very hard to judge on all these testimonies you heard in the last 3 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlotta. So,
if I may add something.
Quickly, because we are a bit behind the schedule.
It's just, since the question, I think obviously Gianni answered very well in terms of the role of the tribunal. But I think, I guess, from a personal perspective, I see the tribunal as a kind of a slow burning process, as an essential step of resistance. Personally, I think then I have particular responsibility to raise awareness, being an academic, amongst my students, amongst my communities, and I think we too tend to take back everything we've heard to our own countries and our own communities to raise awareness. And I do realize that it can be highly frustrating to have these sessions and still see that things don't change. But I think we are an essential step of resistance. I think as an instrument of resistance, the tribunal is immensely important. And we do feel our role personally as jurors as trying to do the same where we come from and wherever our activity allows us to do that. And we're deeply committed to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. This is indeed a very important comment on the PPT. So now I would just give a short reminder of what Simona already said, because even though we're closing the Berlin hearing today, it will still continue because the comments you heard are just preliminary comments from the jury. So we will have a final judgment in December, and we hope to see you there soon. And now I would kind of say goodbye to you and also give the word to my co-moderator, Khalid, who wants to say something towards you and Germany and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me adjust it. Thank you very much for giving me also this chance to conclude today. Ladies and gentlemen, in this hearing, which focuses on the human rights violations experienced by migrants and refugees people, and particularly on the human rights violations with impunity in the field of health enabled by the EU politics. In the beginning, I would like to thank the organizers and all these ones who contributed to the success of this work. I also would like to thank everyone who participated in this work, the witnesses, the jurors, the ones who are here with us, and the ones who participated online. The participants spoken during this session about violations that occurred and occur in different regions around the world because of the politics of the EU, both on subjects of immigrations or in respect of favoring political, commercial, or other interests on human rights, rather the provision of direct or indirect support to the regimes that commit these violations. However, they also reported violations that are being committed unintentionally or intentionally by the law enforcement authorities, by these or by those acting on their behalf. These violations occurs on the territories of member states of the EU and under their authorities. These violations amount, according to the report submitted by the participation or by the participating organizations and the witnesses' statements, to be systematic. Ladies and gentlemen, about 5 years ago, I came to Germany during what they called the wave of asylum. At that time, I witnessed some wrong, unexpected, and even irresponsible actions, decisions, and practices. The term refugee wave was the excuse on which all this was blamed. A year ago, during my work, I observed, and yesterday I listened to some testimonies that indicate that these actions are continued until now, and after 5 years of the date of the so-called the wave. And despite the decrease in the numbers of arrivals comparing to 2016. If this indicates anything, it indicates the problem does not fall in the size of these numbers, but in choosing which human rights values applies to whom, when, and how. Ladies and gentlemen, I owe Germany a lot of things. Germany offered me a safe shelter at the time when I nearly lost my life in the country where I came from. In Germany, I completed my studies where I couldn't do that where I came from. Moreover, even today, in the center of the German capital, Berlin, I have the opportunity to speak to you loudly. But that doesn't mean in any case. This is not the case with everyone. Some of the witnesses have been stuck in the cycle for years, and some of the participants in this hearing have hidden their identity or questioned whether they will be deported as a result of their participation. and speaking up about the experience that they have been exposed to. It's shameful that this is happening in a country that adopts human rights. It's shameful that this is happening in a country where it's the state of law. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the EU Convention on Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the photos from the Greek islands. This is the EU Convention on Human Rights, and this is the photos of the people who nearly died coming to the EU, while the people who were trying to save them being criminalized. We cannot close one of our eyes to see only one aspect of the truth. Human rights are not selective, and freedom is not indivisible. The fact that I have the right to speak here does not mean in any way to be silent about what is happening to other people in the European territory and under the rule of its laws. As long as this union presents itself as advocator for human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this session, I had the opportunity to speak on my behalf and on behalf of the Alliance organizing this hearing. Just as the aim of this court is to give a platform to the voiceless, now as a refugee, I speak on my behalf and on the behalf of those voiceless. On my behalf and on the behalf of those who are afraid to speak up. I speak here as a human rights defender to condemn these violations and demand the rights of the victims. The most basic rights are recognition, condemning, and the end of this violation, as well as holding accountable those who were responsible for it, besides apologizing for the victims. Ladies and gentlemen, the conditions that the world are going through today proved our vulnerability as human beings to the danger of life, and even forced us to work together to survive. Since the end of the Second World War, Germany has proven an example to follow for admitting mistakes and seeking to hold perpetrators accountable. Therefore, as defender of human rights, and from here, from the Permanent People Tribunal, I call today on officials and decision makers in the EU to stop these violations and work with us, activists, and with the ones who are harmed by these violations to end this violation and stop it immediately. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the difference between being held in camps where the end is death by burning, or in camps where reaching it is fraught with death by drowning, or living in it is fraught with death by burning, or leaving it is fraught with death by waiting? Ladies and gentlemen, enough is enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for being here, being part of this tribunal. This seems very formal. I actually wanted to have it a bit more, more open, and now I'm standing here behind this microphone. Everything is very in a hygienic modus. But yes, so you already did, but I again want to thank all the witnesses that spoke up, that were here, and that were also in the Zoom chat, and yeah, thank you for all the organizations involved. I would like to briefly name them. It's Abschiebebeobachtung, NRW, Alarmphone, also Oldenburg, Armut und Gesundheit, Banying, Ärzte der Welt, BAF, also die bundesweite Arbeitsgemeinschaft der psychosozialen Zentren für Flüchtlinge und Folteropfer, Black Visions and Voices, das Berliner Netzwerk für besonders Schutzbedürftige, Borderline Europe, CUT Project, Comitato, Verita, Giustizia, Nuovi, Desaparacidos, ProAsyl, Deutsche AIDS-Hilfe, Flüchtlingsrat Bayern, der Flüchtlingsrat Berlin und der Flüchtlingsrat Brandenburg, Handicap International, Inhumanity, Institute of Race Relations, Initiative Origiallo, IPPNW, die KOK, Lab Trade Union, La Vida Campesina, Legal Center Lesbos, Les Migras, Love 146, Medibüro Berlin, Medico International, Medinetz Bielefeld, Mainz and Medibüro Berlin, Medico International, Medinetz Bielefeld, Melissa, Network for Migrant and Refugee Women in Greece, PICPA, ProAsyl, Respect, Sans Papier, Sea-Watch, CEDUAC, SOCSAT and LVC Almeria, Stand By Me Lesbos, Transnational Institute, Transnational Migrant Platform, United Action, VDR, Wailing, and Ja e.V. A big thank you to everyone. I mean, you can also clap in the Zoom chat, just show us your support. I know there are many people online. I mean, you can't see it here in the room, but there were several hundred people following this tribunal on YouTube and Zoom. It's really, we are very grateful for your support. And I would also really like to thank the judges. And I would like to thank the Permanent People's Tribunal and again the Transnational Institute for supporting us, and yeah, the Transnational Migrant Platform with Frit, Gianni, and Simona, the interpreters and the technicians, especially the Kionos cooperative, which works for NGOs and movements. They really supported us. A big thank you to them. They are based in Barcelona, and maybe we can show them quickly. So we have a face to the voices that we listen to. Yeah, a big applause for them. Thank you, guys. It was an amazing job you have done. I would also really like to thank my team here in Berlin. I want to thank the moderators. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank our tech team. Thank you so much for supporting us and making this possible. And I hope, yeah. And I also want to thank the volunteers. So, and I would also like you to come here to the stage so we can have like a final picture. So please come here, and because these roses I don't want to take back. Don't be shy. Come.